This didn't happen that long ago. In fact, it wasn't until after all of this that I even learned how many disturbing Craigslist encounters other people had experienced. Up until then, I'd always believed it was pretty safe, as long as you stayed careful and used common sense. Clearly, I didn't follow my own advice. This happened during my very first month in a new house, after moving across the country to an area I barely knew. The move itself had been long and exhausting, and I'd sold off almost everything beforehand to make it easier. Because of that, the house felt empty at first, so whenever I had downtime, I'd casually scroll through Craigslist, just looking for things to slowly fill the space. Mostly furniture, anything to make the place feel like an actual home. I'd already used Craigslist a few times by then and had no problems at all. Every pickup had been normal, straightforward, and uneventful. So honestly, I had no real reason to be on edge. Then, one night after work, I came across a listing that immediately caught my attention. It was a gray sectional couch, almost exactly what I'd been searching for. According to the post, it was in great condition, and the price was surprisingly reasonable. $200. I messaged the seller, and he replied pretty quickly. His name was Brian, and from the way he texted, he seemed laid back and easy to deal with. Nothing about him raised any red flags. We agreed on the price and started working out how to meet up. The only problem was transportation. I only had an SUV, which meant I'd probably have to make multiple trips to move the couch piece by piece. Brian lived in the next town over, so that would have turned into a long, annoying process. When I mentioned this, he offered a solution. He said he could load the couch into his pickup truck and bring it directly to my house. That immediately gave me pause. Ideally, I wanted to see the couch in person first, and I didn't love the idea of giving my address to a stranger online. But at the same time, it made a lot of sense, and he wasn't being pushy or weird about it at all. It genuinely felt like he was just trying to help. After thinking it over for a bit, I agreed. We set a time for the next day, 5:30 in the evening. I went to bed early, sent him my address the following morning, and spent most of the day cleaning and organizing the house in preparation. As 5:30 got closer, I settled into the living room and put something on TV, leaving the blinds slightly open. Right around the exact time we'd agreed on, I noticed headlights coming down the street. Moments later, a black pickup truck slowly drove past my house. At first, I didn't think much of it, until I realized there was no couch in the truck bed. I assumed it was just a neighbor and went back to watching TV. But only a few minutes later, that same truck passed by again. This time, it slowed down. Not in a casual way, but like whoever was inside was paying attention. It felt like they were studying the house, maybe even looking through the windows as they rolled past. A small wave of unease hit me, but I brushed it off. I sent Brian a quick text, just to confirm he was still on his way, and tried to focus on the TV again. After that, no more trucks passed by. What was strange, though, was that Brian never replied. He didn't show up. No explanation. No update. When 6:30 rolled around an entire hour late, I tried texting him again. The message didn't even send. He had blocked my number. I had no idea what happened, but I wasn't panicking. Mostly, I was just annoyed that my time had been wasted. I figured maybe he found another buyer, or something came up, and instead of explaining it, he just decided to disappear. It was frustrating, but not unheard of. As the night went on, I stopped thinking about it. I made dinner, worked on setting up my office, and eventually got into bed with YouTube playing in the background. I don't even remember falling asleep. I must have passed out mid-video, because the next thing I remember was waking up suddenly in the middle of the night. What woke me wasn't a dream, it was a sound. A long, slow creak of wood. And I knew, without a doubt, it was the sound of my front door opening. I was certain it was the front door. I knew that sound too well. It was the only door in the entire house that creaked like that, and it had always annoyed me. The realization hit immediately. Someone had just opened it. I sat straight up in bed and locked my eyes on my bedroom door, barely breathing as I listened. That's when I heard quiet, careful footsteps moving around downstairs. The house was still mostly empty, so every sound echoed, making it impossible to miss. Panic crept in fast, but my body wouldn't move. I felt frozen in place. The footsteps stopped right at the base of the staircase. Then there was silence. Long, unbearable seconds passed before a man's voice broke it. He said my name. Not shouted, not whispered, just spoken plainly. The voice sounded deep, older, someone I didn't recognize at all. He said my name again, and then again. What made it worse was how flat it sounded. No anger, no urgency, no emotion whatsoever. Just standing at the bottom of the stairs, repeating my name, like he already knew exactly where I was. My hands were shaking as I slowly reached for my phone and dialed 911. I was terrified he'd hear me talking, but I didn't see any other option. I whispered to the operator, trying to keep my voice as low as possible. The man didn't move. He stayed right there, still calling out my name over and over. Once the operator confirmed officers were on the way, I quietly slid out of bed and moved into my closet. I had no idea if he was planning to come upstairs or not. Nothing about this felt normal, and I wasn't about to take that risk. About 30 seconds after I hid, the voice stopped. That almost made things worse. From inside the closet, I couldn't hear footsteps, doors, or anything at all. My mind started racing, wondering if he'd moved upstairs or if he was standing right outside my bedroom, listening. I stayed completely still until, after a few agonizing minutes, I heard the sound of police arriving. The officers searched the entire house. It was empty. Whoever had been inside was gone. I immediately told them about the Craigslist couch and the guy named Brian. I was sure it had to be him. I'd given him my address earlier that day, and I'd seen that black pickup slowly passing my house before everything happened. I still had his phone number, so I assumed it would be easy for them to track him down. That's when I learned the first problem. The reason my text wouldn't send wasn't because he blocked me. The number didn't exist anymore. It was a deadline, completely untraceable. The second issue was that even if they somehow identified him, there was no solid evidence tying him to the break-in. No witnesses. No proof he was actually the one inside. Still, I'm almost certain it was the Craigslist guy. I can't help but wonder if his original plan was to lure someone to his place instead, somewhere he had more control. Maybe when that didn't happen, he decided to try anyway, even though it was riskier. Or maybe he thought he could intimidate me into coming downstairs. I don't know. What still bothers me the most is that he never came up the stairs. He just stayed down there, calling my name. The police said it looked like the front door lock had been picked, so I replaced it immediately and installed a security camera. Moving wasn't really an option, so all I could do was take every precaution I could. Nothing like that has happened since. Every now and then, I'd catch myself scrolling through sites like Craigslist or eBay, just killing time. It felt like a kind of online thrift shopping, something I did for fun. And every once in a while, it actually led to a really good deal on things I normally wouldn't bother buying. This was back in 2018. I had come across a few Craigslist listings that caught my attention, but one stood out in particular. The photo showed a large bin filled with home decor candles, picture frames, little decorative pieces. Just random stuff you'd use to make a place feel more lived in. At the time, my apartment was pretty empty, so I figured a bunch of inexpensive decorations could make it feel warmer. I messaged the seller, a woman named April, and she seemed incredibly nice. She explained that she was in the middle of moving and wanted to get rid of anything she didn't need or didn't want to risk breaking during the move. She wasn't trying to make money off it, just wanted it gone. For $20, She said I could take whatever I wanted from the bin, or even the entire thing if I felt like it. We agreed to meet on a Thursday evening after she got off work, around 6 o'clock, in a nearby parking lot. I finished work at 5 that day and drove straight over. The meeting spot was a grocery store parking lot, and it was pretty busy at that hour. Cars were constantly coming and going. People walking in and out. It felt safe and normal. I texted April to let her know what my car looked like and where I was parked, then waited. Since it was winter, I had the heat blasting and was hoping she'd arrive soon. A few minutes later, though, she messaged me saying she was getting out of work late and asked if I'd be willing to meet closer to her instead. I won't lie, it was annoying. But she sounded genuinely apologetic, and if it saved time for both of us, I figured it wasn't worth making a big deal out of it. She sent me the address of another parking lot closer to where she was, and I plugged it into my GPS and headed out. I wasn't very familiar with that part of town, so I didn't really know what to expect. The drive took about 15 minutes. Even though it was only around 6:30, it was already dark because of the winter months. What really stood out, though, was that none of the buildings around the parking lot had their lights on. It turned out to be a small outdoor strip mall, completely empty. No stores open, no people, no movement at all. The only car there was parked far off to one side, near the edge of the lot. As soon as I pulled in, something felt wrong. April had mentioned she drove a red Toyota SUV, which matched the lone car sitting there. I drove over and parked a few spaces away from it. The sudden change from a crowded public grocery store lot to this dark, abandoned feeling place was unsettling. I told myself I'd just feel it out. I was already there, and if anything felt too strange, I could leave immediately. I stepped out of my car and stood next to it, waiting for April to get out of hers. That's when I noticed I couldn't see into her vehicle at all. The windows looked tinted, but the lack of lighting made it even harder to tell if anyone was inside. Standing there in the cold, staring at that car, I felt my discomfort slowly growing. I hadn't even been standing there for more than 15 seconds when I was about to give up and get back in my car. That's when the door of the SUV finally opened. But it wasn't the woman who stepped out. It was a man probably in his 30s, with dark hair and a thick, tan winter jacket zipped up to his neck. He spoke quickly, like he'd already rehearsed what he was going to say. He told me that April couldn't make it and was still stuck at work, so she'd sent him instead to handle the Craigslist exchange. That immediately set off alarms in my head. If that were true, I should have gotten a message about it. Instead, it felt like that detail was deliberately kept from me until I was already alone in that parking lot. I hesitated, and he must have noticed. Almost immediately, he tried to sweeten the situation. He said that because of all the inconvenience, I could just take everything for free. As he said it, he smiled, popped open the back of his vehicle, and stepped aside, gesturing for me to come take a look. I didn't move. I was trying to figure out the safest way to leave without escalating things. Maybe if we were still in a busy parking lot, I wouldn't have felt so uneasy. But out there completely alone, surrounded by dark buildings, it felt wrong. I told him I just needed to call April quickly to confirm and started backing toward my car. The smile dropped from his face. I got into my car, pulled up my messages, and dialed April's number. It rang for only a moment before I heard something that made my blood run cold. A phone ringing. Outside. I looked up just in time to see him calmly reach into his pocket and end the call. My stomach sank. The moment the call stopped, his demeanor changed. He started walking quickly toward my car. I turned the engine on, slammed it into drive, and took off without thinking twice. As I drove away, it hit me all at once. This had to be a setup. There probably never was an April. Just this guy pretending to be a harmless woman selling decorations, hoping to lure someone like me into showing up alone. I still can't stop thinking about what might have happened if I'd walked over to that open trunk. When I got home, I called my sister and told her everything. She urged me to contact the police, which I did. Unfortunately, since no crime had technically been committed posing as someone else online, while disturbing isn't illegal, they couldn't take any action. But to me, it was obvious. That wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a trap, and I can only hope no one else fell for it. For the past few years, my life had been pretty routine, all centered around the city. I lived there, worked there, and spent nearly all of my time within the same few miles. I owned a condo just a short drive from my job, so everything was easy and familiar. There was never really a reason to leave that bubble. That changed recently when a couple of issues popped up in my condo that were starting to get on my nerves. Hiring someone to fix them would have cost way more than I wanted to spend, but the bigger problem was that I didn't own any tools. To save some money, I decided to check Craigslist and see if anyone nearby was selling a used toolkit. Honestly, it was something I probably should have owned already. I was surprised by how many listings there were. Some were overpriced, others missing pieces, but I wasn't looking for anything fancy, just the basics. After scrolling for a while, I found a listing that seemed perfect. A lightly used toolkit with everything I'd need, listed at a fair price. I sent the seller a message, and within 15 minutes, we had it worked out. He told me I could swing by his place the next day to pick it up, whenever I was free. I didn't get off work until around 7 that evening, but I usually stayed up late anyway, so the timing didn't bother me. What did give me pause was the location. His address was about 45 minutes outside the city, in a small town I'd never even heard of. When I looked it up on the map, the satellite view showed maybe 100 houses clustered together, surrounded by nothing but trees. Still, the deal seemed good, so the next night after work, I made the drive out of the city. The farther I went, the emptier the roads became. Once the buildings faded away, the drive actually felt kind of peaceful. But by the time I started getting close, it was already well after sunset. The area turned mostly wooded, with only the occasional gas station or small shop along the road. When I finally pulled into the neighborhood, my mood shifted. The place was unsettling. The houses were scattered throughout the forest, old and worn down, like they'd been there forever. Some of them looked like they hadn't been updated in decades, maybe longer. A few appeared completely abandoned. As I continued down the narrow road toward the address, my unease grew. When I finally arrived, the house looked no different from the others, small, aging, and barely holding together. I tried to reason with myself. I grew up in the city, and places like this were unfamiliar to me. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed, and I was just overthinking it. I pulled into the end of the driveway and stepped out of my car. The silence hit me immediately. There were no voices, no TVs, no cars passing by, not even distant sounds from inside the houses. It was so quiet it felt unnatural, like the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. I walked up to the front door and knocked. As I stood there waiting, I kept getting this strange urge to look over my shoulder, like something was behind me. After about a minute, the door finally opened. The man standing there was average height, with long brown hair and a messy beard. He looked disheveled, like he didn't really take care of himself. Without much small talk, he led me inside and into the living room. Sitting on the couch was a thick tool bag, stuffed with the tools he'd listed for sale. What made everything feel even more unsettling was how dark the house was. There were almost no lights on, just a single lamp in the living room that barely did anything except cast long, warped shadows across the walls. As we walked through, I also noticed the back door near the hallway. It looked completely busted, barely hanging in place, and it opened straight out into the woods behind the house. I didn't really know how to properly check the toolkit anyway. At that point, I just wanted the interaction to be over. I briefly pretended to look through the bag, then pulled out my cash and turned around to pay him. That's when I realized he was gone. The room was empty. My heart jumped. I called out for him, but there was no response. The house was dead quiet, aside from the occasional creak from the floors and walls. I couldn't tell if it was just the old structure settling or something else. My adrenaline kicked in immediately. Something deep down told me this was bad. I called his name one more time, then slowly started backing toward the front door, leaving the tools right where they were. As I stepped into the hallway, I nearly ran into someone standing there. It wasn't the same guy. I couldn't see his face clearly because he was mostly in shadow, but he was noticeably bigger, taller, broader, and far more intimidating. I forced myself to stay calm and said, as casually as I could, that I was just heading out to my car to grab the money. He didn't respond. He also didn't move. The way he stood made it obvious he was blocking the hallway on purpose. I froze, trying to think, when I suddenly heard a creak to my right. I turned my head toward the sound. The room beside me was completely dark. I think it was the kitchen, but there was no light at all, just total blackness. That was the moment my instincts took over. I bolted. I sprinted toward the broken back door I'd noticed earlier and burst outside. As soon as I did, I heard loud creaks behind me, footsteps running after me inside the house. There was no fence around the property, so I cut around the side and ran back toward the front. As I reached my car, someone suddenly darted out from behind it and took off in the opposite direction. I didn't stop to think. I unlocked the door, jumped inside, and slammed my foot on the gas. It took a while for the adrenaline to wear off. Looking back, I'm almost certain there were multiple people inside that house. I think one of them had been messing with my car, either trying to break into it or stop it from starting so I couldn't leave. I don't know exactly what they planned to do, but I'm convinced that if I hadn't run when I did, I wouldn't have gotten out at all.